In the sprawling mansion perched atop a windswept hill, the millionaire's son, Ethan, lived in a world of opulence that felt like a gilded cage. At 22, he had never walked, his legs frail from a congenital condition that baffled the finest doctors money could summon. His room, a cathedral of mahogany and silk, held everything he could desire: bookshelves brimming with leather-bound tomes, a state-of-the-art gaming console, and a panoramic window framing the estate's manicured gardens. Yet, the view only deepened his sense of confinement, a reminder of a world he could see but never touch. Nurses and therapists cycled through, their clinical routines and pitying glances blending into a monotonous blur. Ethan's father, a tech mogul whose fortune rivaled small nations, had long resigned to funding experimental treatments, each ending in quiet disappointment. The boy's mother, a distant figure lost in her own grief, rarely visited, leaving Ethan to the care of staff who treated him more like a fragile heirloom than a person. The room was silent save for the soft hum of a medical monitor, a constant companion tracking Ethan's vitals. His wheelchair, custom crafted with sleek carbon fiber, sat by the bed, its unused wheels a silent rebuke. He spent hours sketching intricate cityscapes in a notebook, his hands deft but his spirit heavy. The drawings were his escape, each line a step he could never take. The staff whispered about his condition, their voices hushed as if his disability were a scandal. Ethan heard them, their words carving deeper than any scalpel. He had stopped hoping for miracles years ago, settling into a life where days bled into each other, marked only by the changing light through his window. Then came the new maid. Unlike the polished professionals before her, she arrived with no credentials, only a worn satchel and eyes that seemed to see past Ethan's wheelchair. Her name was Clara, a woman in her 50s with calloused hands and a voice warm as sun-baked earth. She didn't flinch at his condition or fawn over the mansion's grandeur. Instead, she moved with purpose, tidying his room while humming an unfamiliar tune. When she spoke to Ethan, it wasn't with pity but with a quiet challenge. Small steps, every day, can move mountains. Her words lingered, unfamiliar and unsettling, stirring something Ethan hadn't felt in years: possibility. Clara, the new maid, brought a presence to the mansion that felt like a gust of fresh air through a long-sealed window. Her first week was unremarkable to the other staff. She dusted Ethan's room, polished the ornate furniture, and changed the linens with the same meticulous care she gave every task. But to Ethan, her every move carried a quiet intensity, as if she were studying him, not just his surroundings. She didn't hover like the nurses or speak in the overly gentle tones he'd grown to despise. Instead, she worked with a rhythm, her hands steady and deliberate, as if each motion was part of a larger plan. Her dark eyes, framed by lines etched from years of hard work, met his without hesitation, and when she smiled, it was neither forced nor patronizing. It was the smile of someone who knew something he didn't yet grasp. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the Persian rug, Clara set down her cleaning supplies and approached Ethan's wheelchair. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, already pulling a stool beside him. Before he could respond, she was there, her hands folded, looking at him not as a patient but as a person. "You've got strong hands," she said, nodding at the sketchbook open on his lap, where a half-finished drawing of a bustling city square lay. Ethan shrugged, unused to compliments that weren't laced with pity. Clara didn't press. Instead, she told him about her grandmother, a woman who'd rebuilt her life after losing everything in a flood, not through grand gestures but through small, stubborn habits, rising at dawn, planting one seed at a time, rebuilding day by day. "Habits are power," Clara said, her voice low but firm. "Start with something small. Move your fingers, like you're drawing, but on purpose, every day." She demonstrated, flexing her own fingers in a slow, deliberate pattern. Ethan stared, skeptical but intrigued. No one had ever spoken to him like this, as if he could change his story, not just endure it. Clara didn't wait for his agreement. She stood, resumed her work, and left him with a challenge: 5 minutes of intentional finger movements before she returned tomorrow. As she hummed her unfamiliar tune, Ethan felt a spark of something unfamiliar: curiosity, or perhaps defiance, flickering in the quiet of his gilded cage. The days following Clara's challenge settled into a subtle but undeniable shift in Ethan's room, as if the air itself carried a new charge. Clara arrived each morning, her worn satchel slung over one shoulder, her presence as steady as the sunrise. She didn't push Ethan overtly, but her quiet expectation was inescapable. After tidying his room, she'd sit by his wheelchair, her stool creaking under her weight, and guide him through the small exercises she'd prescribed. 5 minutes, just your fingers, she'd say, her voice calm but unyielding, like a teacher who knew her student could do better. Ethan, still skeptical, complied, not out of belief but because Clara's gaze made him feel seen, not as the millionaire's broken son, but as someone capable of more. He'd flex his fingers, tracing invisible patterns in the air, mimicking the motions of his sketching. At first, it felt pointless, his hands stiff and clumsy, but Clara watched with a nod, as if each twitch were a victory. She began weaving stories into these moments, tales of people she'd known, ordinary folks who'd overcome extraordinary odds through sheer persistence. There was the baker who'd lost his arm in an accident but taught himself to knead dough with one hand, building a thriving shop. The seamstress who, after a fire took her home, stitched one dress a day until she rebuilt her life. They didn't wait for miracles, Clara said, her eyes locking onto Ethan's. They made habits, and habits made them. Her words weren't preachy, but they landed like stones in still water, rippling through Ethan's doubts. He noticed how she never treated his condition as a tragedy, only as a starting point. It was disarming, this absence of pity, and it stirred a restless energy in him he hadn't felt since childhood. Clara expanded the routine, nudging Ethan to move his wrists, then his forearms, each step a small escalation. She'd time him with an old pocket watch, its ticking filling the silence. One day, when he fumbled, frustration flaring, she didn't coddle him. "Keep going," she said simply, handing him a stress ball to squeeze. Every habit starts messy. By the end of the month, Ethan's hands moved with a new ease, and though he'd never admit it, he began to look forward to Clara's visits. Not just for her stories, but for the faint sense of control her routines offered in a life that had always felt dictated by his limitations. Months passed, and the once static air of Ethan's room buzzed with a quiet transformation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Clara's daily visits had become a rhythm, her steady presence anchoring Ethan's growing resolve. The small habits she'd instilled, finger flexes, wrist rotations, arm lifts, had evolved into something more ambitious. Now, Clara stood by Ethan's bed, guiding him to shift his weight, to press his palms against the mattress and push, engaging muscles long dormant. Her instructions were precise, her voice a blend of encouragement and insistence, like a coach who knew the game wasn't won in a single play. Ethan's arms trembled with effort, sweat beading on his forehead, but Clara's calm nod kept him going. "One more," she'd say, her old pocket watch ticking like a metronome. The staff, once dismissive of the untrained maid, began to whisper about the changes, Ethan's sharper focus, the new strength in his shoulders. Clara never promised miracles, only progress. She brought a wooden cane one day, simple and unadorned, setting it by Ethan's wheelchair without fanfare. "Not yet," she said, catching his skeptical glance, "but soon." She had him practice standing, gripping the bed frame, his legs unsteady but responding in ways they never had. Each session built on the last, a chain of habits forged with relentless consistency. Ethan's sketches, once his only escape, began to reflect his changing reality. Cityscapes gave way to drawings of open fields, paths stretching toward horizons. Clara noticed, saying nothing but smiling as if she'd expected it. One spring morning, with sunlight flooding the room, Clara helped Ethan to the edge of his bed. "Today's the day," she said, her voice steady but warm. She positioned the cane in his hand, her calloused fingers guiding his grip. Ethan's heart pounded, doubt warring with a stubborn spark Clara had kindled. With her support, he pushed up, his legs wobbling but holding, and took a trembling step. Then another. The room seemed to expand, the world beyond the window suddenly within reach. Clara's eyes shone, not with surprise but with quiet pride. "Habits," she said softly, as Ethan stood taller, "can move mountains." In that moment, Ethan didn't just walk, he reclaimed a piece of himself, proving that Clara's unbelievable faith in small, daily acts had rewritten his impossible.